Perform was developed by Momentum Knowledge Accelerator, one of the 6 Momentum Global Awards. So before we present more on Perform, here's the agenda for today's webinar. We'll have a brief introduction to Momentum's contribution to localization, followed by an overview of Perform and how it supports local capacity strengthening. This will be followed by a discussion on how Perform was used in Timor, Indonesia, and we'll keep a little time at the end open for questions and answers. At any point, please put in your thoughts in the chat and questions in the Q&A, and we'll try and address them in the short time we have for discussion later in the webinar. And questions that we don't get to, we'll be happy to share it with you at the end of the session. And they will be available on the Momentum website as well. Next, please. So our panelists today, we have an exciting panel. We have Barbara Rollins. Barbara is the Senior Implementation Research Advisor of the Office of Maternal and Child Health and Nutrition at the Bureau for Global Health at USAID. She's also the alternate AOR for Momentum Knowledge Accelerator. We also have Meg Kinghorn, who's a consultant with 35 years of experience in localization and NGO strengthening in over 75 countries. Her work focuses on facilitating participatory learning, strategy creation, materials development, project design, and evaluation. She has extensive experience in conducting capacity assessments, designing assessment tools, and teaching capacity assessment design. Beryl Levinger will also be presenting today. She's the managing director of BL Team, a consulting group that supports governments and NGOs in strategy development, learning through evaluation, and capacity strengthening. She's also the chief learning officer at Root Change. A winner of numerous international awards, including 2 Fulbright grants, she's a leader in rethinking how organizations can leverage learning for sustainable impact. Linda Gamova is Senior Technical Advisor for Partnership and Capacity Strengthening at Catholic Relief Services, an international relief and development organization. She has over 25 years of experience in partnership and supporting local organizations to strengthen their capacity and improve performance. Her work focuses on organizational development, change management, and behavior change. Next, please. Yes. We're going to start first with a short overview by Barbara Rollins on Momentum's contribution to localization. Over to you, Barbara.
Thanks so much, Soumya. And hello, everyone. USAID's vision for localization is to expand the share of its programs that are locally led, where a diverse group of local actors define priorities, design and drive projects, measure results, and more fully own and sustain these efforts. We believe this will help to save more lives, reduce poverty, strengthen democratic governance, reduce corruption, address climate change, and work to prevent and respond to conflicts and crises. And the Momentum Suite of Awards is making important contributions to help realize this vision. Since Momentum was launched 4 years ago, the suite has been delivering a number of effective family planning, reproductive, and maternal and child health interventions that help to foster local leadership and strengthen local organizational capacity and performance through power sharing and equitable partnerships. And strengthening the capacity of local organizations is absolutely key to ensuring that development work puts local actors in the lead and strengthens local systems and is responsive to local communities. And to date, Momentum has supported over 50 organizations to improve their performance. And I really encourage you all to take a look at the 2024 Momentum Online Interactive Progress Report that's posted on the Momentum website for more information, not only about what the Momentum Suite has contributed to advancing localization, but also how they're supporting other USAID priorities. And today we will hear from the Momentum Knowledge Accelerator program about an exciting set of innovative yet practical tools to assist local organizations and program implementers to both identify needed performance improvement actions and to carry them out. And this is really an excellent set of resources for supporting localization, and we hope that you find them useful. Back to you, Soumya.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for that short overview of Momentum and what we're doing in this space on local capacity strengthening, assessing capacity and performance, and strengthening partnerships. I'm going to hand off the mic to Meg Kinghorn and Beryl Levinger, who are both the main authors of Perform, to talk a little bit about what Perform offers. Over to you.
Thank you, Soumya, and welcome everybody. We are so happy to have you here, and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to help continue the conversation on organizational assessment and organizational strengthening. So we know that a lot of you have a lot of experience in organizational assessment, and we hope that you will contribute to the conversation in the chat. Look at some of the innovations that you hope to see here in Perform, and let's continue the conversation. As you heard from the introduction, Beryl Levinger and I, my co-creator, we have really decades of experience working in organizational assessment. So when Momentum Knowledge Accelerator asked us to take a fresh look at the organizational framework, the OD framework, and also capacity assessment, organizational assessment processes, we were really delighted to really think about something that has been such a useful process over time, and yet perhaps needs some updating as we enter the new age of localization, of resilience, of systems thinking. And so we hope and we believe that the Perform system contributes to that, and we are looking forward to your contributions as well. So we'll give you a quick overview, hopefully whet your appetite for more information, which will be available, and we will be announcing that at the end. But we'll talk about what is Perform, its features and innovations, results that are generated, and evidence that is gathered, and then, of course, finishing with the resources available. Next slide. So what is the Perform system? It is not just an organizational assessment tool. It is really a suite of tools. It's a program of organizational strengthening and course corrections. It is based on the Enhanced Capacity Development Framework, which is a paper that's available on the Momentum Knowledge Accelerator website, which takes a fresh look at the OD framework and looks at 5 interlocking components that come together with capacity. This program assists implementers in monitoring in an ongoing way the system, the organizational process. Next slide, please. So what are these innovations that we're talking about? So it's beyond assessment, beyond a one-time or repeated assessment. Perform is really an ongoing, internally driven, evidence-based monitoring system. We really believe that the Perform program, the Perform process, stimulates critical internal evidence-based thinking about performance by the organization, not by the external support organization. We believe strongly that it mirrors the USAID's capacity development policy and the criteria for the CBLD-9 measurement. It centers on the organization's vision of what it wants to be, what it is trying to become. So that is the starting place for the assessment. It draws on systems thinking, complexity, resilience, all these things that are so critical in our time now. Then going beyond that, it really focuses in the ongoing process on what is it that's driving or hindering performance. What is it within the organization that's either accelerating strong performance or holding back poor performance? And then what can the organization do to change that? And we believe that is a critical level of thinking for the organizations to actually own and drive their own performance. Then it contextualizes evidence. So often evidence-based tools are based on external or even culturally driven images of what is performance. This helps the organization define for themselves and then learn how they can monitor their own performance. And then it integrates performance measurement and performance strengthening on an ongoing basis. The 100-day plans, which is 4 to 6 months, depending on how often the organization would like to revisit this. After the initial mapping, there is the monitoring phase, looking at evidence and monitoring those drivers to see how they're doing in rapid feedback cycles, rather than waiting for 1 year, 1/2 year intervals. Next slide, please. So we would love to hear in the chat, what are your impressions? What do you think is innovative? And as you listen to this, please be thinking and jotting down for us what you think and for yourself. We hope that you are familiar with USAID's local capacity strengthening principles. Here they are here as a refresher. And some of the ones that we believe really are important to perform is, of course, start with the local system. Perform looks at organizations as dynamic, complex systems, working within dynamic and complex systems, which need resilience, adaptation, and ongoing monitoring. And then number 3, plan for and measure performance improvement in collaboration with partners. That is, of course, so important, and even helping the organizations set those benchmarks, set those measurements of evidence that will actually demonstrate their performance claims. And we believe it really aligns with all of these. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of discussion, which we wanted to pause and just address. There's a lot of discussion. Are we talking about capacity building, capacity strengthening, capacity development, performance? What is it we're talking about? And this is an important debate. However, Perform really answers that question from a different perspective, because we believe so often the emphasis is placed on who's doing the action and who's receiving the action. And Perform likes to flip that. As Barbara said in her introduction, localization is really recognizing that local actors design, drive, and sustain development efforts. If that's true, then it only makes sense that they are the ones designing, driving, and sustaining their own organizational improvement. Therefore, Perform really focuses on performance, actions, activities, over standardized organizational characteristics, policies, plans, org charts. It really enhances the organization's ability to engage in self-directed performance improvement. So it strengthens their capacity to strengthen their own capacity, as it were. And then it recognizes that the role of external actors is to support the ambitions and efforts of the local organization, not drive them. We strongly believe that local organizations are the heroes of their own organizational growth stories, and we believe Perform is a way to emphasize that. So we all hope that you will join us in changing the lexicon to never again say, we will strengthen an organization's capacity, or they strengthened our capacity, but they supported our capacity strengthening efforts. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll give you a quick view of what is the framework that Perform uses, and then we will get into the process from there. So the Perform framework, again, it's available on the Momentum Knowledge Accelerator website, has 25 practice statements, which are behavior statements in the 5 domains. Just to take a look at a couple of these to demonstrate what we're talking about. The first domain is to foster self-determination. Is the organization standing on its own, the opposite of donor-driven? And so if you look at number 2, routinely takes initiative to mobilize resources as new community needs emerge. So that's not waiting for the next donor RFA or grant opportunity. It's actually taking an initiative and mobilizing resources. Domain number 2, to produce sustainable results. The first one, consistently offers services that reflect user needs and preferences. So if an organization is to say they do this, what is the evidence that they actually provide? Rather than having just a strategic plan, they say that they can do this. What is the evidence? That really provokes a whole learning journey to say, how is it that they know that the services they provide are actually meeting the needs and preferences of the constituents and others to go on that are adapted to the organization and help them drive their own internal workings. Next slide, please. And so now we'll look at the process of Perform. And for that, I will hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Beryl Levinger.
And thank you, Meg. So I want to begin by saying that Perform is a holistic system, as Meg has pointed out. And we're going to focus today on the entire system and acquaint you with some of the key terms. The idea, though, behind Perform is that a team comes together, does a rigorous assessment, a self-assessment, where they set their own priorities. They identify not only their priorities, but their performance in relation to 25 statements that Meg has already shared. They then analyze that performance, and we'll talk about the drivers momentarily. And after they've analyzed that performance, they develop their 100-day improvement plan. Finally, at the end of the process, which may be 2 to 3 or even 4 cycles, there is a very comprehensive evaluation where new knowledge is harvested and new goals may be set, or the organization, if they're doing it in conjunction with a specific project, they may move on to transferring the system and the approach to other work that they're doing. Next slide, please. So let's get cozy with a couple of the terms. And I want to start with the most important one, maybe. You'll decide for yourself which is the most important. The performance rating, which is the first column. So basically, an internal organizational team rates its performance on those 25 practice statements through facilitated discussion and consensus scoring. A simple 3-point scale is used, and during this discussion, participants cite evidence to support their proposed rating, and that evidence will be used later in the process. Now let's look at the priority rating. Before the group mapping session occurs, each of the 25 performance statements is assigned a priority, high, medium, or low, and approximately 1/3 of the statements should fall into each category, ensuring that the prioritization is truly meaningful. In other words, everything is not of high priority. This first activity is essentially the beginning of a customization process and also of a user-centered process to organizational strengthening. Now let's look at the urgency index. This is generated automatically in a template that is in Excel, and it helps the organization to focus its performance improvement work. The index balances performance and priority ratings, sorting each of the 25 practices into 3 categories: urgent, which means that action is definitely needed, and the sooner the better; optional, yeah, you could do this, but it's not necessary; and no action required at this time or not needed now. An important feature of Perform is its diagnostic power. You've heard the term drivers already in Meg's presentation. There are 5 drivers that are scored. This is different than the group scoring. This is done confidentially and individually rather than by consensus. And you can see the drivers include both internal and external considerations. Let's go to the next slide, please. As you can see, a single score sheet incorporates all the terms that we've just reviewed. These scores are then entered into an Excel template for deeper analysis. Let's go to the next slide, please. So once scores are entered into the Excel template, a visual display is generated. This display includes the priority rating, the practice rating, the urgency index score, and ratings for each of the 5 drivers. Next slide, please. Beneath the display that you just saw are some filters. These filters are part of the magic of Perform, and they allow users to sort findings based on any of the variables measured by Perform. The power of the filters is that they significantly enhance a user's ability to make sense of all the information that's been generated through the scoring process. So let's look at some examples. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates 2 examples of how the filters might be used. In the first example on the top, the filter was used to highlight all the practice statements that received an urgency index of urgent. Typically, a team would want to know where to begin. Interestingly, in this first filter view, all 7 practices marked urgent have either inadequate or only partially adequate leadership support. So a good starting point might be in the 3 practices that received a top priority rating. Can you see that? A top priority rating and at least partially adequate leadership support. The last statement, periodically assesses current practices against quality standards, might be a low-hanging fruit for this organization, as the resources, relationships, and skills are strong or fairly strong. Perhaps the main challenge here has to do with norms or organizational culture, and of course, that is profoundly influenced by leadership. The example below is a filtered view based on priority. And you could see, therefore, that all of the priority ratings are high. That's the little triangle in green. In this example, a low-hanging fruit might be the second practice statement. The resources, relationships, and knowledge are all in place. Needless to say, not all organizations are always going to pick the low-hanging fruit first, but the filters help users to dig deeply into the how and the why of their performance as they plan their performance improvement programs. So this is a very strong analytic tool that is automatically generated when the data from the scoring sheets is entered into Excel. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So what happens after mapping? No more than 1 month after completing the mapping phase, performance improvement planning begins. The team's first task is to gather evidence to support their initial scoring. That evidence is proposed during the mapping session, but now it's actually going to be collected and externally assessed. I'll say more about the evidence momentarily, but for now, once the initial scoring has been externally reviewed, it's time to begin the first 100-day planning cycle. At the end of this cycle, which is really 4.5 months because we're talking about 100 working days, changes in drivers are monitored, new evidence is presented and validated, and learnings are harvested, and then the next planning cycle begins. So this is a highly adaptive management supporting system, and it also is highly iterative. As I mentioned earlier, the evaluation is going to allow us, after several cycles, to look at how the practices have changed and to draw conclusions for the next iteration or next phase of an organization's development. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide highlights the relationship between the ongoing evidence-based monitoring at the end of each 100-day cycle and the evaluation phase, which, as I shared a moment ago, entails a full reassessment of the practice statements and accompanying drivers. Here, when we're talking about the full evaluation, the aim is to step back and examine in depth what changes in performance have occurred and how those changes have advanced the organization's objectives. Next slide, please. Now we're going to return to the question of evidence. Evidence is used to support a team's rating decisions. This evidence is reviewed and scored by an external panel to determine whether the team's initial ratings should be sustained or adjusted. Supportive evidence takes many different forms. It could be a manual, a report, a document, photos from an event, an audio file with stakeholder comments, or a stakeholder-created card and chart exercise. The use of evidence adds an important layer of rigor to Perform. Next slide, please. As we've said many times now, Perform was designed to be user-centric. In other words, the system is not a cookie-cutter approach to performance assessment and strengthening. The documentation that Soumya is going to review in a moment provides ample guidance about all the ways it can be adjusted to reflect an organization's priorities, preferences, and resources. And now, over to you, Soumya.
Thank you so much, Megan Beryl, to provide this overview of Perform. There's voluminous documentation about this. This is all available on the Momentum Perform website, which I shared earlier. And so thanks so much for trying to compress everything into 20 minutes. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to add that we have had a couple of examples of testing this proof of concept, and we've used this information to update the resources that we have that's available on the website. So we have a user guide, a very detailed facilitation guide, templates in Word and Excel, recorded presentations on topics that are relevant, such as facilitation and organizational paradigms, etc. A brief that talks about how this links to localization, and frequently answered questions. So frequently asked questions. All of these are available on the Momentum website, and I shared the link a little bit earlier. Before I move on to the next section, I see a number of questions that are coming in about how this compares to the OCA and the ITOCA and so on. And thanks also for putting in any reactions in the chat. I see a few of them. So that's an important question. We'll address that at the end of the next part where we're talking to Linda. Next slide, please. So we have had the opportunity to use Perform in Timor, in Indonesia. And we have Linda Gomova on the call in the webinar today from CRS. And she will be talking a little bit about her experience with their local partner, SysTimor, in Indonesia, in Timor, where they facilitated a Perform session. So Linda, if you could just join in. Yes. Hi, Linda. So I'd like to ask you a few questions about your experience using Perform. First, let's start with what factors led CRS to encourage SysTimor to use Perform to assess their organizational performance? And also, what was your personal experience implementing this methodology since you were there during this process?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here to share experience, my experience, personal one, and also experience of my colleagues from CRS in Indonesia and also SysTimor. I'm really, really privileged, honored to represent our local organization, SysTimor. They are a great, hardworking organization, and I wish they would be with us today. But we also have video from them in one of our videos, so you can hear more from their very charismatic director, Haris Omatan, that I really enjoyed working with. Your question was about the factors contributing to CRS's encouraging SysTimor to apply this system, if you will, in the middle of all they do. They're emergency response organization. They're doing humanitarian response, earthquake response, volcano, flood, busy. You can imagine eastern part of Indonesia. So thanks to long-term partnership relationship, to mutual trust related to this kind of initiatives, thanks to the right timing. That was the right timing for SysTimor because they were in the middle of their strategic planning, and they were stopping and reflecting again what they do, how they do moving forward, and also in September, they were celebrating the 30th anniversary of the organization. So again, it was kind of a great timing for them. Again, the moment they learn about Perform, they were like, okay, so we can look at our vision and mission and values again and aspirations, think about our performance goals, think about the capacity strengthening projects we implement, our work with stakeholders. So why not? Yeah, we can do that because it's kind of a right timing to kind of even to evaluate where they are vis-a-vis their operations, performance, etc. And also CRS was implementing, is still implementing a project called Empower, which is capacity strengthening project in humanitarian response. So we also wanted to put this piece into bigger puzzle of, if you will, organization resilience. So these were the major factors contributing to our conversation, at the end of, as a result of which Systemor agreed to engage in several months of work, right, in the beginning. So we were preparing together for a month and longer, and then we met for a week, and I was there physically, and then several weeks to finalize their improvement plan, and right now they're implementing it. So my personal experience, you asked about it, I can say that again and again, I learned that it's so important to have committed leadership of organizations when they are especially engaging in this kind of self-reflection, when in the design, in driving and developing their own growth. Self-enthusiasm, of course, it was very important, and we have seen about like 20-25 people, being on the calls with us for weeks. Some of them were representing in the core team, facilitation team, and then all of them the entire week from early in the morning till the end of the day, very engaged. And all this was driven by their strong desire to grow and be stronger leader in their country, in their communities. And I think that also what I learned is, again, in this process, the importance of foundational systems and processes they had, and more than foundational, because there are 30 years of organization, which are doing a great job. I think that what I also learned is that, so these are the factors contributing to the process of design, driving and developing, but also these conversations based on the framework, like, again, what are we talking about? Importance of resilience and 5 domains of performance, reminding ourselves about importance of learning and agility and self-determination and sustainability, etc. I can say that also one of my personal experience was that with the Perform is that now that we heard Meg talking and her esteemed colleague again, Beryl, how these different pieces neatly fit together to, in the end of the day, to help organization to have this bigger picture plan. They have their performance goals with indicators. They have their improvement plan for 100 days, several capacity strengthening initiatives. So it really helped throughout the process to have this big picture driving based on the design. So this is my personal experience appreciating the process and different elements and tools within the system of Perform.
Thank you so much, Linda. So it seems like it was a pretty intensive process that you worked through with them, and not just CRS. Systemor too was really committed to the whole thing because they saw this as an opportunity for them with their 30 years of experience to see how they could grow even further and looking at the big picture. So just building on this, and you may have addressed this a little bit already, can you give us a couple of examples of what CRS and Systemor gained through this use of Perform?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about gaining throughout the process, right? And right now also, it's like every time I think like, okay, what's the value add of this exercise? It's time consuming, it's effort intensive, but we were seeing the value of it. And from Systemor, what I was hearing is that there were so many aha moments also throughout the process. For example, one of them that, the change in organizations, the growth does not necessarily always mean money and resources, or really or just, series of trainings. It's really the importance of change of culture in the organization, norms, engagement of leadership, board engagement. So there were so many places when they were looking into the strategies of change, they were like, we need to meet more often. We need to use the data we are collecting, or look at what kind of data we are collecting. So these conversations were happening throughout the process, and they were gaining this better understanding of what they do, how they do moving forward, how they can be more effective, efficient, and more sustainable, and maybe more proactive in their internal change, if you will, and achieving their bigger vision and mission and aspirations. And again, one of the gains, they kept saying that now they really, really love having these 2 concrete performance goals with indicators for 3 years, that they are going to measure the achievement by the end of 3 years. And the improvement plan developed will help them to monitor, guide the process, which will be also based on evidence that they started collecting and were validated by stakeholders. They really appreciated that moment, which will help them to do it evidence-based again and validated by others, which is not only self-perception or what their strengths are or assets or how they need to move forward. So maybe these are around the gains coming from SIS Timor. For CRS, we have our sustainability framework. Of course, we have our cycle of capacity strengthening and tools, and how this contributes to better performance. So we really also wanted to have this fresher look, updated way of thinking, and Perform allowed to do so. And thanks to all the research done, all the thinking around resilience and 5 domains, and particular 25 practices, I think that Meg talked about, that was an opportunity for CRS, again, by piloting this tool to revisit its frameworks and tools, and to incorporate several elements, such as performance drivers, such as measurable performance goals, validation by stakeholders, etc. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. That's helpful. So what comes next? I mean, both for SIS Timor and for you within CRS as well.
Right now, SIS Timor is working on their improvement plan. We started the process back in May, when we were preparing, having our weekly calls, where SIS Timor, again represented by 2 persons, we were really looking closely to the language, terminology, the aspects of Perform, those 5 domains, asking ourselves, like, why shall we look at all, cover all practices, etc. So back in May, we started this prep, did workshop and lots of consultations. In July, improvement plan is there now, and SIS Timor is implementing it and continuing looking at evidences, the strengths of evidences, engaging with stakeholders around monitoring, evaluation, learning, and accountability. They're reaching out to donors and communities. They're looking at the standards in humanitarian response. And they're internally changing some of the processes of communication, coordination, and collaboration. Soon there will be basically, again, once they decided to look at it, not 100 working days, but 6 months. So not to do it quarterly, but every 6 months. So soon they will sit down again and see where they are vis-a-vis the achievements, and also the performance drivers. They were looking closely if they have resources, if they have the staff skills, if leadership is still committed or behind the decisions. So basically, they're implementing some of the activities which are in improvement plan. And CRS is still in CRS. We're reflecting on our experience. We have so many stakeholders internally to CRS. You can imagine country program, regional teams, global teams, some other partners. We're looking at our, like I said, frameworks and tools and updating them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much, Linda. That's really helpful. I'm glad you're reflecting on this work, both in Timor as well as thinking more broadly in terms of what this might mean in terms of taking it forward. We're going to move to the next part of this session. We're opening up to the audience for questions, and there are a few in the chat. But before we do that, I want to go back to something that I should have done right in the beginning. I just want to put a little poll up to see where you're all joining from. Dakota, would you be able to put that poll up, please? I don't see the answers. The responses aren't there. Okay. Never mind. I don't think this is working. So that's fine. But I see from the chat that we have participants from all over. So I'm glad this is having a broad reach. So let me just go to the questions. You can go to the next slide. And one of the main questions that's come up is okay, sorry, the poll came up. So we see most of our people, 48% from North America, mostly, and then the next group is East Africa. But that's good to see a pretty broad spread of people from all over. That's great to see that. And again, for those who have joined and those who haven't joined as well, we will have all of these resources on the web, on the Momentum website, Perform website, and the link has been shared, and we'll share it with you again at the end of the session. So going back to the questions, the one question that's come up, several times by several people is like, how is this different? How is this different from the OCAT that focuses on organizational capacity? What's special about Perform? So I know Meg was trying to answer it, but it may be easier to talk about it as well. Meg, can I pass this on to you?
Sure. No, that's a great question, and one that I hope people really think about. And I really recommend the Enhanced Organizational Capacity Framework that really gets into the leading tools and compares them. So that might be helpful to some of you. But yeah, they're very different, and they have different uses. An organizational capacity assessment looks at very specific systems and structures. Are these in place? Do people have job descriptions? Do you have policy manuals? And that is the capacity. Are they able to do this? Do they have these things to perform? Perform really looks at, are they actually using their capacity and actually performing? Are they reaching constituents? Are they able to provide financial information to stakeholders that are accurate, timely, and complete? So it really looks at capacity in motion. That's one difference. And therefore they can be used together. For example, if an organization is low performing in their ability to provide financial information to stakeholders, then that might be an opportunity to go to the financial management component of an OCA and really look at, okay, do you have the policy system structures? Do people know what they're doing? Are there things that we can do there? So they can perhaps be used together. Another big difference is that OCAs tend to be, as Kim Kane said in the chat, they tend to be that snapshot of organizations, often based on opinion. And so you get a baseline end line because they take 2 to 3 days to do, very in-depth, very useful, but time-consuming. They're usually just done baseline, end line, or maybe annually. That is difficult. I've heard organizations say, wow, I wish we could have known this more often, how we're doing. We could have changed. And so Perform introduces rapid action cycles, rapid feedback to say, well, we think it's about our skills or our internal norms. That's holding us back. Let's see how we can change that. And then come back in 6 months and say, is that having effect or not? If it's not, let's change it. If it is, let's continue. So it is that ongoing monitoring. And then, of course, the use of evidence. Evidence, as we know, is important. OCAs tend to be a standard, external, defined thing that tends to focus on objects. And as Linda said continuously as we worked together, it really helped CRS and SysTimor really think about the difference between having and doing. Do you have a policy or are you doing the policy? And Perform really focuses on that doing. And then with the results, if you are missing having something, well, then you get that and you can check it off and get a clean capacity assessment. Where if you're doing it, oh, it changes behavior. We need to do this more often. And Linda referenced that in her comments as well, that they're changing the way they're talking to constituents, talking internally, monitoring these things. And I think this is what we want for organizations, not just to have the policies and org charts. It's a big question, and I hope I at least shed a little bit of light. They're different tools, different systems for different uses that could be used together or independently.
Thank you so much, Meg. And I think it's in the Q&A also, Kim Kane from MSH also emphasized on this monitoring aspect, that it's an ongoing assessment that can be done to show progress. Related to that, there's another question or comment later about kinds of results organizations have had after implementing their 100-day plans, given that performance improvement does take time. We have not had the opportunity of going that far to see. I don't know, Meg, if you have any other response to that, but with SysTimor, it's been a few months. We'll have to see how that goes forward. I don't know if, Meg, if you or Linda want to say anything about that.
Yeah, and also we had the other pilot in East Africa. And I think they did set up their monitoring plans. We haven't been able to have the luxury of checking in to see how that's going, how the cycle continues, but they have set up their monitoring plans for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Beryl, if you want to say anything about that as well.
Very briefly, I would just add that 100-day plans are research validated as a methodology for sustaining interest in change. And they also are powerful in the sense that the plans are doable rather than overly ambitious. And they support the 100-day cycle in general, supports adaptive management and adaptive responses. So that's just another advantage to them.
I see a comment from Ekpenyong Ekanem, where he says, I like the activity, the process, score sheet analysis, etc., which are very participatory, collaborative, fosters prioritization, ensures local organizations on the driving seat, which is great. So his question is, thriving organizations these days need to be agile, matrixed, and diverse, both in constitution, how they function. How has Perform been applied in some of these dynamic contexts? Have you felt the tension on, for example, rigor? I don't know who would want to answer this. Linda, do you think your SysTimor experience may help you answer this question?
No, not necessarily about the tension, but I think I mentioned one thing that was really kind of not eye-opener for everyone in the room, those who were participating, but importance again and again of engaging with constituents, but also in this case, do the reality check, if you will, with stakeholders. So SysTimor, Harris and his staff thought a lot who to engage in the evidence validation panel. They had community member, they had peer agency representative, they had, of course, board member, they had a donor representative from UN, and they spent hours, an entire day and the next day talking to SysTimor about the evidence they looked at, what they think about SysTimor, its operations for 30 years, its performance in communities, its work with donors, etc. So It was very useful exercise for all. And in the end, I heard stakeholders saying, we want to be part of this more. We want to be really part of the monitoring. We want to continue talking to Systemor to learn. And even from your UN representatives saying that we would like this to be replicated among our partners. Systemor was saying that they are happy to share their experience. So I'm not necessarily answering to the question, but this is how Systemor collaborated and partnered during this process of applying Perform system with its stakeholders. And there are some tensions, but I wouldn't relate them to the ecosystem or the system where Systemor is operating, but particular stakeholders or representative of constituency that were engaged in the Perform process, if you will. Over.
Meg or Beryl, do you have anything more to add on this? Otherwise, we can move to another question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It has not currently been used other than Systemor working in Timor in humanitarian response. That's pretty dynamic with a small organization. But it is certainly designed for that because we need that agility. Our performance, our organizational tools need to be agile and focused to help the organizations really focus their efforts on where they are needed, not to look at the whole, kerplunk manual. So I think that is the thing. There was another question about the framework. Are they separate or interdependent? An organization, they're interdependent, but an organization can say, of that system, if we really focus here, whether it's our learning or external support or self-directed foster self-determination, that will drive other things that will facilitate that agility that the organizations can really drive. What is it that's really do we need now to leverage that stronger performance?
Yes, Linda, you have your hand up.
Very quickly, in the beginning, I think we said that this is a system or a tool for local organizations. My experience shows, especially applying this with Systemor, looking at this with my colleagues from Indonesia globally, it applies to any organization. All 5 domains, all practical statements, practice statements or behaviors, the performance drivers that we talked about, they apply to CRS also, to many partners that were working. So I wouldn't really limit it to local organizations, only to small or big, or in humanitarian response working, or in development, or any and Nexus. It applies to, it comes from organizational development, so it applies to all over.
That's a really good point. And I think we've had these discussions before, Meg and Beryl, and the types of organizations. You have local organizations, but again, there was another question from Kola saying, can you use this for projects? Can you use this for, government structures? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And any reactions, Meg or Beryl?
Beryl, do you want to talk about customization? Because that's also in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question on customization too. I mean, I think you can address the same thing, Beryl, at the same time, where there's a question about, what are the advantages of a structured and comprehensive approach like this? And would you recommend or caution against adaptation? There's a question in the chat as well on that, as well as in the Q&A. Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So first of all, the idea of having a system rather than a tool, I think needs to be underscored again. This is a system that includes a performance assessment, but it's much more than that. So how can it be customized? It can be customized at the very outset when priorities are established. And even before that, when the organization writes its goal statement and the assessment, we didn't probably emphasize this enough in our presentation, but the entire assessment is rooted in that goal statement that the organization set for itself. That's really the beginning of the process. And then setting the priorities is another form of customization, and those priorities are set in relation to the goal statement. There are many other options for customization, including modifying the 25 practice statements. We wouldn't suggest that an organization begin with a modification, but in subsequent iterations that would be possible. As the monitoring proceeds, only those practice areas and the drivers associated with them are monitored. How the organization structures an evidence review panel is customized to that organization's constituency. So again, this is just scratching the surface. In the documentation, you can see a much fuller answer to this question of customization. But the main point is to go back to the original intent, which is to make a tool, a system, and a set of practices that can fit the needs of the user organization, match the goals, and match the priorities of that user organization. And there's a structure to do that.
Thank you, Beryl. I think we've answered most of the questions here. And the person who wrote about the Portuguese tools in for the baby hospital, we have all our tools and resources in English at this point, but please do write to us. We can put our information in the chat. Please write to us at this email in the chat, and we can continue this conversation to see how we can support you in using Perform within your context. I've also shared earlier the resources are all available on the Momentum Perform website. There is a range of resources out there. There's a short video which also has a little clip from Sis Timor, the executive director that Linda mentioned, that will be really, you might find very useful as well. So we're out of time, but thank you so much for staying on this webinar to the very end. And we will post responses to these questions along with the webinar content. Both the video and the slides all will be available on the Perform website, and we will share this with you as well by email as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your good questions and comments.
Yes.
Pleasure to work with you all.